Hey, everybody, I hope you're doing well today. Well, let's take a look at the theory of the firm, the introduction and overview video. And in this video, I am going to lay out the general course of study of your studies through IB Economics, studies of the theory of the firm. Let's take a look. All right, the big picture. First of all, it's very, very important for you to realize what you're studying. Are in the middle of studying microeconomics. Theory of the firm is like microeconomics, right? Microeconomics looks at the behavior of consumers like me and you walking into a store and deciding whether or not to buy something. And then based on that, the supplier will decide whether or not they want to sell it and maybe what the price should be. That is microeconomics. Okay. Theory of the firm, first of all, it's a theory. But all of the things you're studying in economics and IB economics are theory. Every chapter of every textbook is a theory. Theory of law and demand, law and supply, theory of law of demand and supply, theory of government intervention, theory of market failure. All of these chapters that you're looking at are theory. So theory of the firm is saying, like, in theory, this is how firms would decide what the price is of their particular product. It's micro. So I use the analogy in class of like the high school cafeteria at my international school here in Santiago, Chile, and they sell quinoa salads. And quinoa salads at this particular cafeteria, I think, are overpriced. Right? They're roughly about $5 a salad. Now, microeconomics would look at me making a decision of whether or not to buy that salad, and the firm deciding whether or not they want to sell it, first of all, and second of all, what the price would be. But theory of the firm would say, hey, let's go into the meeting. Let's go in and look and sort of like listen into the meeting, in theory, that would take place inside the cafeteria with the executives of that business to decide what the perfect price would be for that salad. And it would be based on things like their costs, their prospective revenue, because all firms want to make money. They all want to make profit. Okay, so theory of the firm is going to take a look at what would happen if you had a bunch of economists running a business in the cafeteria and how they would come up with the price of $5 a salad for the $5 for the quinoa salad and why, and how they would maximize their profits as a result. Because remember, profits are what remains after you cover your costs. Profits come from the revenues after you cover your costs. Okay, so the big picture here, Jocelyn Blink has a nice quote. It says, we look at the different types of behavior of firms in relation to the markets in which they operate and the nature of competition in different markets. Okay, so this unit of the IB course syllabus is set up with section 1, which is production, cost, revenue, and profit. And what I want you to think about this first is probably it's the first chapter you're going to face in your course companion, and it is going to set up a model. And then we are going to take that model and apply it to 1, 2, 3, 4 market structures. Perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. Okay? So the first 5, 6, 7, 8 lessons of theory of the firm are essential for you to understand how, in theory, firms would make a decision based on their cost, revenue, and profit of what the price of their quinoa salad will be. Okay? And then, and this is critical that you understand this, then we would look at how that cafeteria, that firm, would behave in a market structure of perfect competition, in a market structure of monopoly, in a market structure of monopolistic competition, in a market structure of an oligopoly. So check it, 1, 2. These things here are critical for your success in the next 4 sections of your studies. Okay, and here's the underlying reason why this would be true. Look at my friends. Economics is philosophy, man. It's more philosophy than it is science. What existed first was human behavior, and then psychologists or philosophers, more like Adam Smith being one of them, looked at this human behavior and said, hey, can we generalize this? Can we take this behavior and graph it? And that's where economics came from. So our human behavior, in terms of economics, is graphable because we all tend to behave a similar way. Okay, so if there's this theory of cost, revenue, profit, this meeting going on inside the cafeteria, then how would those humans behave in these different markets? Well, you know right away that if you are starting a business and you know that you are the only one providing this good, and you know it's wanted, you could charge whatever price you wanted. And so your behavior, you know this to be true, admit it. You know that your behavior would be different if you were the only firm operating and providing this one good, right? If you were the only supplier of something, then you would probably try to charge as much of the highest price you possibly could in order to still sell some goods, but make the highest profit. So, but that's how you can understand monopoly. But perfect competition, and we'll look at market structures in a second, but perfect competition is where you're price takers. The best example of perfect competition, which is theoretical in itself, is a foreign exchange desk. And if you're an international student, you know, like you're trying to change whatever currency you live in with dollars or euros or some sort of major currency, or even if you travel, perfect competition is where the price is made outside the market, outside the firm. Firms are price takers. What does that mean? Well, it's like an exchange rate that comes about, I know I live in Chile, so it's the difference between the peso and the dollar. What's the exchange rate between the peso and dollar? Well, if I have a foreign exchange desk, right, I need to take the price from the foreign currency markets and offer that price for the dollars, or that price for the pesos, or that price for whatever currency I'm trying to sell. So if this same firm, the high school cafeteria, worked in a market structure of perfect competition, they would have to take the price. They couldn't set on a price of $5. They'd have to look at the international market for what the international market price is for quinoa salads. And then they have to sell that. Otherwise, they wouldn't sell anything, because you know for sure if you're looking to exchange your dollars or whatever currency you're working into another currency, and you see one that's a worse rate, you're not going to that kiosk. And that's why all foreign currency exchange desks have the same exact, more or less, same exact price for whatever currency they're trying to sell. Okay? And the other two market structures are monopolistic competition. That's basically when you have a unique product, but you operate in a competitive market. So if you come up with a new idea, like you're in a small town, maybe in any country in the world, and they don't have sushi, well, if you come in and you open up a sushi restaurant, you have a monopoly. You're the only sushi restaurant. You have a monopoly, and you could have, you could set the price because no one else is selling monopoly. But you're not working with no one else is selling sushi. But you're not working in a sushi market. The structure you're working in is the dining market, the going out to dinner market. So if you price your sushi too high, you're not going to have anyone go to your restaurant. So you got to price your sushi relative to what it would cost for like a pasta dinner at a good Italian restaurant, or maybe like a nice enchilada at a nice Mexican restaurant, or a steak at a nice steakhouse, right? So monopolistic competition is a unique product, but in a different market. And oligopoly is when there are a few small firms that can work together. Airline businesses are a good example of this. Car manufacturers are a good example of this, where they could work together as small firms, high barrier of entry, and they operate a different way. The point of this is not to talk about the market structures. The point of this is to say, the people that work in the high school cafeteria are figuring out their cost, revenue, and profit, but the way they behave is going to be dictated by the market that they work in. And you can understand this very easily, because we are all who we are, but we operate different in the structures that we operate. When you're a student, you operate one way. When you're a son or daughter, you probably operate another way. When you are a friend, you operate another way. When you're a grandchild, you operate another way. So within the structures, we behave differently, but we're still ourselves. And that is the whole big picture here of theory of the firm, okay? And I think, this whole human behavior thing gets really lost on IB students. You got to think about, these are people, man. They make decisions that you and I would make. And if you're an IB student, hey, my friend, your mind is flexible and mature enough to be able to understand how to make decisions. And the people that are running businesses, are you are as equally capable as people running businesses in terms of like understanding logic, understanding the behavior behind it. So don't make it too complicated. Okay. Then the last thing for market theory of the firm, sorry, is price discrimination. And this is a very simple idea where basically perfect price discrimination would be where suppliers would know exactly how much our willingness and ability to pay for a good is before we walk up to it. So imagine if you're at like some some artisan fair, and you walk up and you see a painting that you love, and because you love it so much, there's like $20 that like comes up on the billboard on your forehead, right? And you walk up there, and the person who's selling it knows that you want $20. Well, they're going to say, hey, or you would be willing and able to pay $20, so they charge you $20. But then some kid walks up and they see it, and they're like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'd pay $3 for that. And as long as the supplier could make some money, they would sell it to that person for $3. So it's perfect price discrimination means that they actually know exactly how much we are willing and able to pay, and they charge us for that price, which swallows up, if you think back to our other studies, it swallows up all of the consumer surplus. But also, and in general, when you see price discrimination, it's thought of a little bit differently. And this is when you go to the movies, and the adults are paying one price, $8, and the kids are paying $4. But guess what? They both occupy a seat. So why are they discriminating? Why are they making, the adult pay $8 and the kid pay 4? Because they know that the willingness and ability of a kid to pay for a movie ticket is less, right, than the willingness and ability of an adult. So they charge 4 there and 8 there. Another example of price discrimination is like you buy things in bulk. So you go to a store, and like in the United States, like Sam's Club or these big like places, or like a warehouse, a big bodega where you can go and buy a bunch of stuff. And if you buy a bunch of them, you get it cheaper, right? So per roll of toilet paper, the 20 pack, right, is cheaper than the 4 pack per roll of toilet paper, or whatever product it might be, granola bars, or I don't know, juice boxes for lunch. Okay, there are other types of price discrimination, but you basically get the idea that the suppliers are charging the price that's most reflective of the person's willingness and ability to buy it. All right, cool, my friends. Well, that is the introductory video to Theory of the Firm. Smile, you're there, you can do this, right? And you're going to see as you go through this video series that Theory of the Firm is not really as complicated as everyone's made it out to be. All right, everybody, I hope you're doing well. I hope you found this video to be helpful, and we'll talk to you in a bit.
In this video, we're going to do a profit maximization problem when given a production function. So a firm uses 2 inputs, x1 and x2, to produce a good that is described by the following production function. So the firm's output Q is a function of input 1 and input 2, and its specific functional form looks like this. The firm sells its output at $80 per unit, so price P equals $80. The cost of input 1 is $4 a piece, and the cost of input 2 is $2 a piece. We want to solve for the profit maximizing input mix, profit maximizing output level, and find what the firm's actual profit would be. So step 1 is to just set up a profit function. Profit, as usual, is just total revenue minus total cost, where total revenue is price times quantity. The price is $80. What is the quantity? The quantity is just going to be our production function. So I make that substitution in here for the quantity, price times quantity. And we're going to subtract out the cost. The cost of input 1 is the price of the input times the number of units of input 1 that the firm uses. And likewise, the cost of input 2 will be given by 2 times the quantity of input 2. Moving on. So now we're going to just maximize that profit equation that we ended the last slide with by taking a couple partial derivatives. We'll take the partial derivative of the profit function with respect to input 1. So I'm going to bring this 1/2 down from the exponent on input 1. So 1/2 times 80 is where this 40 is coming from. Then for this input 1, it's 1/2. It's going to be then -1 to finish up the derivative. So input 1 will be raised to the -1/2 power. Don't have to do anything with input 2. That's treated as a constant here. And then finally, we're going to take the derivative of partial derivative of -4 times input 1, which is just -4. We're maximizing, so we set this partial derivative equal to 0. And I'm just going to call this equation A. Okay, taking the partial derivative of the profit function with respect to input 2, we get this result. So I bring down this 1/4 on the exponent here of input 2. So 80 multiplied by 1/4 is just 20. And then on the exponent here of input 2, it's 1/4 minus 1, leaving us with the input 2 raised to the minus 3/4 power. And then finally, the partial derivative of minus 2 times input 2 is just minus 2, setting that result equal to 0, and we'll call this equation B. So what I'm going to do now, we basically have two equations and two unknowns. I'm going to solve equation A for x subscript 1 input 1. So just first moving 4 over to the right-hand side, we get this. And now following the rules of exponents here, I'm going to move input 1 into the denominator. And then I'm going to multiply both sides through by input 1 here, raised to the 1/2 power. So we get this result. And if we divide through by 4, 40 divided by 4 is 10. And now I'm going to just square both sides to get rid of this 1/2 term over here. So 10 squared gives us 100. And then input 2 now, because we're squaring that, will be raised to the 1/2 power. We're going to plug this equation into B over here. So where I have input 1, I am plugging in this result right here. And then simplifying that. So the square root of 100 is 10, so 10 times 20 is 200. And then input 2 raised to the 1/2 power multiplied here. I'm just going to multiply these exponents here, 1/2 and 1/2, we get 1/4. And leaving everything else unchanged for a moment. Rewriting that result. Adding up these exponents on input 2 gives us this result. Following the rules of exponents, bringing input 2 down into the denominator, and then multiplying through by x raised to the 1/2 power, dividing through by 2, and now finally squaring both sides. We will use 10,000 units of input 2. We, on the last slide, found input 1 equals this result, so making a substitution of 10,000 in here for input 2 and simplifying. We will also get 10,000 for input 1. The firm's output at this input mix here. So just plugging 10,000 in for input 1 and input 2. The firm will produce 1,000 units of output, and its profit will be total revenue, $80 times 1,000 units, minus the total cost, 4 times 10,000 units of input 1, and $2 times 10,000 units of input 2, simplifies to a profit of 20,000. Okay, I hope you found this video helpful.
Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well today. Well, let's take a look at market structures, this introduction and overview video that's going to help you understand what we do in theory of the firm with the model that you learn at the beginning called production, costs, revenues, and profits. Okay, here we go. All right, the market structures. These are the case studies, right? These are the case studies to which you are going to apply the cost, revenue, and profit model that you learned in the first chapter. All right, so what are they? Well, they're perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. Okay, these 4 market structures are what exists in the marketplace that we are going to apply the production, costs, revenues, and profit model that all firms do. That model is a model that goes on in theory inside firms when they're trying to decide what the perfect price is for each particular good that they make. Then These market structures are structures that exist on the outside of the firm that they might participate in. So think about costs, revenues, and profits, sometimes called production costs, revenues, and profit, as a model that you're going to apply to these things, okay? So here's another way of thinking about it. Every firm's going to figure out what their cost, revenue, and profit are. But the way they behave is going to be dictated by the structure in which they have to behave. So if they're in a perfect competition market, they're going to behave a certain way. If they're a monopoly, they're going to behave a certain way. If they're monopolistic competition, they're going to behave a certain way. Oligopoly, they're going to behave a certain way. And those behaviors are going to be different, just like you behave different at school than you do at home, than you do with your grandparents, than you do with your friends. Okay? You're still you. You still make the same decisions, right? But the way that you behave in the marketplace or in the structures, or the way that you behave is dictated by the structures around you. All right. So have that in your mind, right? And here's the other thing, and this is the thing that's super important, I think, for econ students to realize, is that economics is human behavior. And you know for sure that if you are a monopoly, you are the only game in town, you are going to charge as high a price as possible. And still, hopefully, people will be able to afford it, right? So you can maximize your profits. If you're an oligopoly, you're going to have a few competitors, right? But you're still going to try to charge as high as you can based on what they do in order to maximize your profits. And in perfect competition, which by the way I'm going to talk about in a second, which is the opposite of monopoly, this is where there's like no barriers of entry and there's incredible amounts of competition. You're going to behave a different way, right? And you know that if you were just going to start your own little business and you have this knowledge because this is human behavior. Economics is human behavior turned into philosophy. And the philosophy is what turns into how we behave in certain market structures because frankly, you know, it's just human behavior put on flat diagrams. All right, so let's take a look at the market structures, the first two, perfect competition and monopoly. All right, perfect competition. It is obviously one of the four market structures with the following characteristics. Number one, a large number of small firms. In perfect competition, the firms have no control over price. All firms sell a homogeneous product. There are no barriers of entry, and there's perfect information and perfect resource mobility. Examples of this, agricultural and commodity markets and the foreign exchange market. Okay, first thing, the idea of perfect competition, guess what? It's super theoretical. I think the best way of explaining how this works is if you have ever traveled and exchange money from one currency to the other, because that is a market, and the foreign exchange market, guess where they get the exchange rate? From the outside. They get it from the Forex market, from the foreign exchange markets, where there's massive amounts of currencies traded every day. That's where the price comes from. The firms that operate in the market structure perfect competition have no control over price. They're what is called price takers. If you're a price taker and you try to change the price, you ain't going to stay in business very long. Just think about yourself at an airport or like, I don't know, in some tourist area traveling and you want to change whatever currency you have in your pocket to another currency and you roll up and there's 4 kiosks, right? And 3 of them have the same price because they use the Forex market price from the currency markets and one is trying to, charge you too much. Are you going to go there? No, you're not going to go there. So if you're in the foreign exchange market, right, if you have a kiosk, what are you going to do to attract visitors? Well, you're going to have a nice store. Maybe you have, the way that it looks outside. You have your people in uniforms. You make yourself look professional, right? Because you ain't changing the price. All right. So that's perfect competition. The other thing that's super important is this: realize that there are no barriers to entry. And this barrier of entries thing is really important, and they're different in the different market structures. And I want you to think about it this way. If you think about a high school soccer game, at most high schools, think of it in like a metaphorical sense. Most high school soccer games, you can just kind of roll up and watch the game. There's basically no barriers to entry. You don't need any money. Maybe you got to, get past the front gate. But after that, you can just kind of get there. Or if there is, a charge to get into the game, it's pretty nominal, right? Okay. As opposed to going to, a National Basketball Association game or like a professional soccer game, in London. Like, there's a lot of barriers to entry. First of all, the tickets are expensive. Third of all, there's a lot of security. And fourth of all, you got to go to the one stadium, and you can't just see the game. You have to actually go inside the stadium. right? So in a metaphorical sense, barriers to entry means that it's very difficult to get in. It's much more difficult to get into the Arsenal game than it is to get into your high school soccer game, okay? So metaphorically speaking, think about that's what barriers of entry mean. In perfect competition, there's very, very low barriers of entry. All right, cool. We got that one done. Now, monopoly. Monopoly is one of the 4 market structures with the following characteristics, and you need all of these. A single dominant large firm, significant control over price, producers sell a unique product with no close substitutes, high barriers to entry in the industry. And the examples of these are telephone, water, and electric companies in areas where they operate as a single supplier. When I was a kid, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and there was one energy company. And everybody bought their power, their electricity from this one energy company. Now, they were a monopoly. They could have charged whatever they wanted. And in order to control them, the government regulated what the prices were. But they had complete power over the market, right? Another example also from the 80s and 90s was Microsoft. And obviously, Microsoft is still around. But Microsoft created the dominant operating system in the world still today, which is the DOS system originally that Bill Gates, came up with along with his friends. And it turned into the Windows system. Great. So they're a monopoly in the operating systems. But then what they tried to do is use that market structure, right, to sell other products. And that's how Microsoft Word became what it was, and that's how PowerPoint became what it is. And also they tried to use that power to integrate something called Internet Explorer, which was a web browser, right, when the internet was coming out in the mid-90s. And they tried to use one market power that they had of monopoly in the operating system, and they made their operating system, which controls that particular PC, only be able to use the web browser, which controls access to the web. And that monopolistic power got broken down by the United States Justice Department, and they thought it was abuse of power. So monopolies is a way in which firms operate. And of course, if you have your cost, revenue, profit, and you're the only show in town, well, then guess what? You can charge whatever price you want, in theory, so long as people can afford it, okay? So that is monopoly. All right, let's take a look at the 3rd and 4th market structure. Monopolistic competition. Check it. Monopolistic competition, what is it? It's one of 4 market structures. This is the one that students have the most difficult kind of understanding. One of 4 market structures with the following characteristics. A large number of firms, substantial control over market price, product differentiation, no barriers to entry, or very low barriers of entry. The best example, I think, is actually not shoe companies, clothing companies, detergent, computer publishing. Okay, that comes from Jocelyn Blink, but I actually think the best example is a monopolistic competition would be like, let's say that you live in a small western town of the United States, maybe in like western Colorado or something, I don't know. I live in Santiago, Chile, so this is far from a place I've been lately. I used to live in Breckenridge, Colorado, but let's say that you decided to open up a sushi restaurant, yeah? And there's no other sushi restaurants in this small little town. And great, so what are you? You are, check it, a monopoly of what? Sushi. But that's not the only market that you compete in. The market that you compete in is the market for the going out to dinner market, right? The dining market. So while you have monopoly in your one thing, you're actually part of a market that's bigger than you. So as a result of that, you're going to have to compete in a very highly competitive market, which is restaurants, right? The restaurant industry. So you can't really charge whatever you want for your sushi rolls, because if you price your sushi rolls too expensive, too high, they're too expensive, then people aren't going to go to your restaurant. They're going to go have some Italian dinner. They're going to go to a burrito joint, or they're going to go get some good, I don't know, some other kind of food. I can't even think of it. They're going to go to a steakhouse and have a good steak. So even though you're monopoly in your product, in sushi, you're going to have to price your product with products that you're competing against heavily, which would be, like a plate of pasta at a nice Italian restaurant, or, a really good burrito at a Mexican restaurant, okay? So that is how a monopolistic competition market works. And I like the shoe companies here, and those of you who live in the United States, or those of you who follow basketball, or those of you who follow soccer, I can use, 2 examples. It's like, the shoe market is it's like super highly competitive. So what do they try to get a monopoly on? They try to get a monopoly on really famous athletes. That's why Lionel Messi You know, that's why Adidas is paying him millions of dollars a year. You know, LeBron James and Kyrie Irving in basketball, that's why they're getting paid millions of dollars a year, because quite frankly, it's pretty cool to have LeBrons. And if you have LeBrons, well, then that's a monopoly on any sort of shoe that has LeBron's name on it. And LeBron James is undoubtedly the best player in the world right now in basketball. So guess what? Nike kind of has a monopoly on basketball shoes that have LeBron's name on it, but they're competing in a broader market. So it's monopolistic competition. All right. The last one, oligopoly. Oligopoly is one of 4 market structures with the following characteristics. A small number of large firms in the industry. Firms have significant control over price. Firms are interdependent on each other. Products may be differentiated or homogeneous, and there are high barriers to entry. And I actually think the best example of this is the car industry, maybe not so much now, but maybe like 20 years ago, before Hyundai was a global product coming out of South Korea, which is just astounding. What South Korea has done is astounding, absolutely astounding. Before Mahindra came out of India, and out of China comes the brand of Great Wall, which is part of a larger conglomerate of car makers. But before that, in the United States at least, you had Ford, Chrysler, GM. They are the only companies that made cars. Then later on, Honda came in, Toyota came in terms of like the regular, sort of mid-range car prices. Of course, there's BMW, and there's the higher end Mercedes-Benz, and of course, cars from Europe. But in terms of like in the United States, there are basically like 5 car companies, right? They're an oligopoly. Is it hard to get into that industry? Yeah, you gotta have millions and millions of dollars and a lot of expertise to start making cars. So those firms could have worked as an oligopoly, well, they do work as an oligopoly, but they could have actually colluded together to set the price of cars. And also, they're interdependent on one another. So if all of a sudden, which happened after the September 11th, 2001 events in New York City and in Washington, D.C., people in the United States stopped flying in planes, right? And also the price of gasoline went way up because the price of oil went way up. And guess what happened? The car industries really, really suffered. And they all suffered at once because they're interdependent on one another. Okay? So other examples of this would be like airlines, electrical appliance manufacturers, steel, aluminum, copper, cement industry. Cemex is a great example. Cemex is a huge company that practically owns the cement market in Mexico. It comes from Mexico and Central America. I lived in Nicaragua for 4 years, and like the only options you had were basically Cemex cement. Super interesting company, very powerful, but they work, of course, in competition with other large cement manufacturers. Okay, so there are the 4 market structures: perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopoly. These are the market structures that you are going to look at for how the firms behaved using the model that you used of production, costs, revenues, and profits. All right, my friends, I hope you found this video to be helpful, and I'll talk to you in a bit.